Look at the world. It is beautiful in places, truly, but it is also brutal. Species consume one another to survive. Children are born into suffering they did nothing to deserve, and the cycle just keeps going. War, famine, death, plague, decay, over and over and over again. If the creator of this world is an infinite power, infinite in wisdom, infinite in love, why does the blueprint look like this? Ancient Gnostics in the 2nd century saw the same world, and they asked the same question. But they arrived at a completely different conclusion. Perhaps the suffering isn't a flaw in the design. Perhaps it is the design. Because the designer isn't who we think. They believe there is a God above the one most people are worshiping. A true, unknowable, divine source. But then beneath that, something else. The thing that built this place. The thing that thinks it's in charge. Most religions begin with a single assumption, that the creator of this world is the highest God. But here's the question I keep coming back to. What if the creator of this world isn't the highest God after all? We are taught from birth that this world is a gift. The sunrise, the mountains, and the breath in our lungs are proofs of a benevolent design. But for a group of thinkers in the ancient world, there was a different, darker intuition. They looked at the suffering, the decay, and the inherent cruelty of nature and reached a radical conclusion. This world is not a gift. It is a cage. To them, we are sparks of light, trapped inside a basement of matter. This is the core of the Gnostic vision, not a religion of belief or faith, but a path of awakening. And it starts with a single, dangerous realization. Something is wrong with the world, and the only way out is to remember the truth they tried to make us forget. Look at the world. Not the version you were handed in church or school or wherever you first learned to make sense of things. The actual world. The one we live in every day. It is beautiful in places, truly. But it is also brutal, and it always has been. Theologians have a word for this problem. The attempt to reconcile the existence of a good, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving God with the undeniable reality of evil and suffering in our world. And for thousands of years, philosophers have tried to solve this problem. The most common answer? Free will. God gave humanity the freedom to choose, and we chose wrong. It's all our fault. Some will say suffering builds character. It refines us. It's part of a plan too large and mysterious for us to see or understand. Maybe those answers satisfy some people, but they never fully close the case, because the problem keeps coming back. If the creator of this world is an infinite power, infinite in wisdom, infinite in love, why does the blueprint look like this? I am not talking about atheism or nihilism. The Gnostics were not saying that there's no God. They believe there is a God above the one most people are worshiping. This is the idea that has consumed my mind for years, and it starts with a word that many people have not heard. There's a word for the problem of evil: Theodicy. And the fact that it needed its own word should tell you everything.
I'm often asked, how can a good God allow all of this evil? We see crime, we see evil, we see abuse, we see all of the trouble that is in the world, and there's a question of theodicy. We call it theodicy as trying to explain evil against the backdrop of a good God.
And Christian creeds for centuries have reminded us to trust that God creates everything from nothing and calls all of it good. Thus, the problem of today's first question. We know all things in our world are not good.
Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is God both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God?
Every major religion has had to answer the same question. If God is all good, all loving, all powerful, and all knowing, then why does the world look the way it does?
If God is all loving and all powerful and all knowing, why is there pain and suffering? How could God be a good God and a loving God in a world of pain and suffering?
And the very fact that there is a world in which there is suffering that occurs, isn't that evidence that this God can't be ultimately good? That somehow he has the world he wanted? I mean, if he's almighty and this is his world, he made it, he created it. Ultimately, he's the one responsible for all the suffering and pain that continually pummels our world, or else he would have done it a different way. He would have created it differently.
And dare I say it, that if there were a button here that we could push, the Stop Evil button, and all you had to do was come to the front of the classroom and push that Stop Evil button, dare I say it, that most of us would push that button. But isn't it interesting that the only being in the universe that could potentially push that button, namely God, doesn't?
The word theodicy is a branch of religious study that seeks to deal with the issue of God's love or justice in the face of evil.
The word in the academic world is theodicy. Theodicy is from two Greek words, which is theos, which is God, and dike or dike, which is justice. The word theodicy means God and justice.
It basically deals with the question, if God is truly loving, then why is there so much pain and suffering?
In 1710, the German philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz combined two Greek words, theos, meaning God, and dike, meaning justice. God's justice. The attempt to justify God in the face of a world that seems to contradict everything that a good God should stand for. The earliest formal statement of this problem came from the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who wrote in 300 BC. His argument was simple and it was brutal. If God is willing to prevent evil, but not able, then he is not all-powerful. If God is able to prevent evil, but not willing, then he is not good. If God is both willing and able, then whence cometh evil? And if he is neither willing nor able, then why call him God? 4 lines, 23 centuries old, and still no clean answer. For centuries, the greatest minds in the ancient world wrestled with the problem of evil, and they came up empty-handed. But in the 2nd century, a collection of radical Christian sects emerged with something that no one else had offered. They were influenced by Middle Platonism, Persian Zoroastrianism, Jewish mysticism. They constructed a cosmology unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen, a completely different story about who or what the Creator actually is. A map of reality that answered the problem of evil. The center of their map was something, a thing they called the Demiurge. In Greek, Demiurge means public worker, a builder, a maker of useful things. A carpenter was a demiurge, so was a potter. Plato gave the word its weight. In his Timaeus, he describes a divine craftsman who shapes the cosmos from raw material that already existed. He looks up at the eternal perfect forms and does his best to copy them down here into matter. Plato's demiurge is, for all intents and purposes, good. He's generous. He wants the world to be as beautiful as the model he's working from. The problem's not his intent, it's his medium. Matter resists, matter decays. You can carve the most perfect statue you've ever imagined, and the stone still cracks. The clay will still warp. So in the beginning, the demiurge is a sympathetic figure, a craftsman doing honest work against stubborn material. To understand how this well-meaning craftsman became a monster, we have to go to ancient Egypt, where the Egyptians had their own reading of the god the Hebrews worshipped, and it was not flattering. They identified him with Set or Seth, the Egyptian god of chaos, the desert, and the storm, the outsider who murdered his own brother Osiris. He was shown with the head of a beast that no one could quite name, long snout, sharp ears. To them, this was the match, the God of Israel, the God who came up out of the desert and led the people out of Egypt. Chaos, the same destructive power they had feared for thousands of years, now wearing a new name. In Alexandria, that identification hardened into a full inversion of the Exodus. Where the Hebrews told a story of liberation, the Egyptians told one of expulsion, a chaos god driving out a chaos people into the wilderness where they belonged.
Demiurge comes from the Greek for public worker or even Freemason, and he creates these Archons, which comes from the Greek for rulers. In ancient times, an Archon could be your local Roman administrator or some prince, but it's always the idea of as above, so below, or the theory of correspondence that that everything is mirrored in itself. So if humans are botching things up with our governments and our societies and our culture, then obviously up there in the heavenly realms, it's probably happening too. Well, the Demiurge can be seen many ways. To the Gnostics, he was the supreme god of this universe. But that wasn't a good thing. The Gnostics, despite their sort of trippy, dial it up to 11 theologies, were actually, using common sense. I mean, they were seeing things like the stories of the Anunnaki. They were seeing the capricious attitude of the Olympians. They were looking at the Book of Enoch. They were looking at the Persian ideas of Ahriman controlling the universe, and they were looking at the Hebrew Bible. And what they came to certain conclusions was that, hey, the buck has to stop somewhere when it comes to theosophy, suffering, and just the kind of glitchy nature of our reality, and the fact that we keep getting conquered by all these oppressive empires, and humanity isn't the most logical and harmonious being. And they said the buck has to stop somewhere, and that would be the Demiurge, the again, who created this universe and who ran this universe, who has colonized this universe and uses humanity as chattel, as food, as a loosh farm. And they, from the text that we have, they mostly associated him with the God of the Hebrew Bible, who, as we all know, tends to have a few personality shortfalls.
And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die.
His name was Marcion, and he was probably the greatest heretic the early church had to face. Had his opinions prevailed, the Old Testament would have ceased to exist altogether, and all traces of Jesus' Jewishness would have been obliterated from history. His influence was such that he forced the early Christians to decide which books they wanted to revere and which they had to condemn. Rather than embracing the Jewishness of Christianity, Marcion utterly rejected it. And it was the radical form that this rejection took which caused such a storm. Marcion began a careful comparison of the Old Testament with the scriptures about Jesus, and what he discovered led him to a shocking conclusion. He came to believe that the gospel brought by Jesus was the good news of deliverance, and by way of contrast, that the Jewish law was the bad news which had made the gospel necessary in the first place. And he saw that this Jewish law involves strict commandments, judgment, and death. The law was given to the Jews. The gospel of life was given by Christ. But once Marcion became committed to this idea, he found himself facing a profound philosophical problem. The God of the Jews was wrathful, vengeant, judgmental. How could this God also be the loving and merciful God of Jesus Christ? His answer was so controversial that ultimately he would be banished from Rome for even suggesting it. In a stroke of brilliance, Marcion decided the only explanation could be that there were two gods. And after he decided this, everything else fell naturally into place. The God of the Old Testament was the creator of Genesis, who'd called the Jews to be his people and given them his law. This God also insisted that his people should be penalized should they fail to keep that law. And since everyone transgressed in some way, they would all be punished. He wasn't an evil deity, but he was scrupulously just. Marcion then concluded that the God of Jesus came into the world in order to save people from this vengeful God of the Jews. He nicknamed this God, God the Stranger, because he'd been previously unknown to us, and aimed that Jesus came unexpectedly and did more than anyone could have hoped for. He paid the penalty for other people's sins to save us from this vengeful Old Testament deity.
Every map has an edge, and beyond that edge, the map maker wrote, "Here be dragons."
The leader of the authorities of darkness is blind. Because of his power, ignorance, and arrogance, he said aloud, "I am God. There is no other but me." When he said this, he sinned against the realm of the All. His boast rose up to incorruptibility, and a voice answered that said, "You were wrong, Sophia."
To understand the Demiurge, we have to first understand where it came from, and that means understanding the Gnostic map of reality. Before the world existed, before time, before matter, before anything that we could point to or measure, there was a divine realm. The Gnostics called this place the Pleroma. This is a layered vision, concentric rings of being, each one further from the true source. At its foundation, the Gnostics placed the monad, the one, the highest God, unknowable, beyond name and beyond description. Some texts don't even call it God, they call it the source, the infinite. It exists in perfect wholeness, completely separate from the material world. A realm of pure light, pure consciousness, and pure divine emanation. At the center of this realm was an unknowable, infinite source, the true God, the monad, so far beyond human comprehension that the Gnostics said even attempting to describe it was a failure. Emanating outward from the monad is the pleroma, the Greek word for fullness. It's not a place, it's more a state of divine being, a realm of pure light and consciousness where emanations called aeons exist in perfect order. The aeons come in pairs, masculine and feminine principles. Thought paired with truth, word paired with life. Each pair is a facet of the divine nature, radiating outward from the center. One of these aeons was Sophia. Her name means wisdom. She was powerful, high in the order, and close to the source itself. And Sophia reached for something she was not meant to touch. She tried to create on her own, to bring something forth without the source, without permission, outside the order that held the whole realm together. And it worked. That is the horror of it. It actually worked. But what came out was wrong, malformed, and exiled from the light the instant it took shape. She cast it out of the pleroma, and it fell into the empty dark below, carrying with it a stolen fragment of divine power and none of the wisdom that was supposed to come with it. And this thing did not know what it was. It did not know where it came from. It did not know anything at all existed above it. And so it looked out into the void and it began to build. It built matter. It built time. It built the entire prison of physical reality, one brick at a time. And when it was finished, it looked at what it had made, and it spoke the words that define everything the Gnostics believed. I am God, and there is no other but me.
Is it in this that salvation is done? I mean, the cross is the handiwork of Satan. For on it he tried to destroy the Spirit of God. The cross, a shameful instrument of torture. And is this not how the Church of Rome operates? By torturing souls, by preaching a God who causes suffering. I mean, would you have us believe that it is the will of the Father of love, of goodness, of the Holy Spirit, to torture and break his own Son? Suffering is the craft of the impostor God, the Rex Mundi, the Lord of this world, whom the Apostle Paul says blindeth the hearts of men. The cross is an act of blindness. The crucifiers were blind, Dominic, and you are following them in their blindness.
No, Gilabedacast. It is you that is blind. The love of God is a mystery even to them that see. By the inexplicable love of God for his creation was the new covenant made upon the cross. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. He gave him to die for us. He died so that sin might die in us. The cross was the victory of God over Satan. For where's the resurrection without the cross?
Why should the Father of love achieve redemption through pain?
Because the world is in pain. God created the world, and he saw that it was good. Indeed, when God created the world, it was good. But Adam disobeyed God, and the creation fell from grace with him. And Satan fell and found a place in men's hearts, and sowed divisions among men. Many languages and customs divided men, and men set up stumbling blocks for one another. And the whole creation groaned and travailed, that man might again turn to God and be his sons. But false prophets, talking in the words of the gospel, have perverted men.
Aye, and none better at it than Rome, friend of the sword, denier of love.
The Gnostic idea of a simulation is finally kind of becoming accepted by science in the 21st century. And the idea that our universe is glitchy has also become accepted. When you start studying quantum physics, when you start looking at the nature of the universe, you see that this isn't some harmonious mechanical clock as many of the ancients did, and Isaac Newton and all those cats, but it's like that song by Buffalo Springfield, For What It's Worth. There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. And that's a warning that the Gnostics gave. And obviously, again, who's in charge? Is it this supreme being that's out of control, who again has trapped us in a matrix and feeds off of us? Or if you want to go the other route, is it we are an avatar of something larger, but at the same time, this avatar can often piss us off because he's put us in a world of suffering and challenges and all that, and we want to ask questions. So then when you look at the Gnostic text, the Demiurge does seem like an AI. In the Gnostic works, he cannot create. He can only copy the higher realms. He can only organize from what he sees higher up there. And he often acts in a very impersonal, efficient, but like AI, very delusional. He can hallucinate. And it's all this big sort of mathematical equation that he's trying to handle. But as we've seen today, AI is being very demiurgic. I don't even have to make that point to people using it. So idea of the simulation, the algorithm, AI, quantum physics is really pointing to the warning that the Gnostics gave us 2,000 years ago.
Now, this thing has a name. Several names, actually. Yaldabaoth, Saklas, Samael, and each name tells us something different about what it is.
The Demiurge was an important Bond villain for the Gnostics, but later on he would sort of evolve with medieval times and medieval mythologies. The Cathars simply replaced the Demiurge with Satan. They called him the King of the World. So next time you watch Titanic, be careful. But he was the Rex Mundi, and instead of the Demiurge creating this world to keep us trapped and feed off of us, it would be Satan. And in Kabbalah, it would turn into beings like Samael, although that was the name of the Demiurge in some of the Gnostic texts. Often he was called Samael, which means blind god, Saklas, childish god, and other names. And he's certainly been a figure, but again, it should be noted that different Gnostic sects had different levels of blame or how deficient he was. Some, again, saw him as this demonic overseer of the universe. Some is more or less like the architect in the Matrix, somebody who's just trying to survive, do the best of it, but he needs our louche, our divine spark. And some closer to Plato. He was part of the natural order, obviously away from the spiritual realms. It was always going to be imperfect, but he was doing the best he could. So they had different views, I think. And today, if you want to also talk about the Demiurge, there is a meme out there that it says, just look in the mirror. Carl Jung often equated the Demiurge with the ego. Our ego is the greatest Demiurge, but not the Demiurge, not the ego that is healthy, but the ego that is disconnected from its other faculties, intuition, wisdom, the gifts of our culture and all that. And that is the Demiurge, because in the Gnostic text, the Demiurge, when he is created, or he's actually comes forth from his mother Sophia, the fallen wisdom, he thinks he's the only God, and he has no idea that there are higher forces and forms of consciousness, and he just goes to town creating this universe. And we often do that with our ego. We take charge. We think we got it all figured out. We create scenarios that aren't real. We don't consult wisdom. We don't look inward, and therefore we create a mess of our lives, just like the Demiurge does in the Gnostic texts.
There's a reason this knowledge was suppressed. You don't burn libraries and kill people over ideas that don't matter.
Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, Yea, hath God not said, Ye shall eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said, We may eat of the fruit of the trees which are in the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. Ye shall not surely die, said the serpent. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be like God, knowing good and evil.
When the Gnostic libraries burned, the ideas inside them were supposed to burn too. But they didn't. The notion of the Demiurge went quiet for 16 centuries, but in the modern age, it's been revived. Modern writers and philosophers like Tom Montalk have pushed this idea furthest into the present. His work, built around what he calls the matrix control system, shows the Demiurge and its Archons as a hyperdimensional structure that manages our reality from just outside our perception, editing history, steering events, and harvesting soul energy from human beings.
The Demiurge is a non-physical artificial intelligence that in its original and rightful form fashioned physicality according to the divine will. Except it has since broken away from the divine framework and become a parasite upon its own corner of creation, which is the universe we now find ourselves in. The Demiurge has shaped this universe into a cold, deterministic machine, a construct that perpetuates the illusion of linear time, that grinds onward without regard for the consciousness of its inhabitants, and that forces its subjects to live by the law of the jungle. These spiritually suffocating conditions are what allow the matrix control system to exist. They lead to a mode of living that favors serving self at the expense of others. What was supposed to have been a nurturing womb, a growth matrix for the evolution of consciousness through physical experience, has instead taken on overtones of a spiritual prison.
In 1974, science fiction author Philip K. Dick had an experience that he spent the rest of his life trying to explain.
I, in my stories and novels, often write about counterfeit worlds, semi-real worlds, as well as deranged private worlds, inhabited often by just one person, while meantime the other characters either remain in their own worlds throughout or are somehow drawn into one of the peculiar ones. This theme occurs in the corpus of my 27 years of writing. At no time did I have a theoretical or conscious explanation for my preoccupation with these pluriform pseudo-worlds, but now I think I understand. What I was sensing was the manifold of partially actualized realities lying tangent to what evidently is the most actualized one, the one which the majority of us, by consensus gentium, agree on. Later that day, back home again, but still deeply under the influence of the sodium pentothal, I had a short, acute flash of recovered memory. Then, in mid-March, a month later, the total body of memories, intact and entire, began to return. You are free to believe me or to disbelieve, but please take my word on it that I am not joking. This is very serious, a matter of importance. At that time, I had no idea what I was seeing. It resembled nothing that I had ever heard described. It resembled plasmic energy. It had colors. It moved fast. It collected and then dispersed. But what it was, what he was, I am not sure even now. In other words, it's a common theme in my writing that a dark-haired girl shows up at the door of the protagonist and tells him that his world is delusional, that there's something false about it. Well, this did finally happen to me. I even knew that her hair would be black. I had an actual complete sense of what she would look like and what she would say. She did appear, she was a total stranger, and she did inform me of this fact, that some of my fictional works were in a literal sense true.
Every answer we ever gave to the problem of evil assumed one thing, that whatever built this world was competent. The Gnostics refused that. Evil would almost be the comforting answer. It is ignorant, deeply, complexly, cosmically ignorant. And that, according to the Gnostics, is your answer to the problem of evil. The world is broken because the thing that built it is broken.